Just a passing word about the lessons that we have today. They're two of the most powerful lessons in Scripture readings. And they're also the most dangerous. At least in our society, because you know we've done this thing with the word love. And we've hung Hallmark cards all over the place. And it gets sticky and warm and gooey. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a different kind of thing. There's a theologian by the name of Leonard Sweet who has this wonderful one-liner I would encourage you to remember. I'm going to give it to you now and hang on to it. It's not about doctrine, dummy. It's about relationship. And there's the Christian gospel in miniature. How much damage we've done as we've, you don't believe what I believe. You must be awful. Well, turning to the gospel, and that second most dangerous reading. From the Gospel of John, from chapter 15, beginning with verse 1. I'm the true vine. My Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciple. And there ends our reading of the gospel. Simple and complex. Complex because of what we've done with some of those words. But notice, it's about bearing fruit. It's about abiding. It's about, in other words, it's about hanging out with each other. And if you and I hang out with each other in ways that our relationship grows and provides laughter, and joy, and wonder, and comfort, and inspiration, wow, life will get better and better. But we've got to be careful with it, as I said before, because all too often we can sentimentalize those concepts. And when we do, we pull the strength out of the images. So abide and bear fruit. Now, what's that bearing fruit stuff mean? Years ago, when I left seminary, I went to Rome, New York, and I was the assistant pastor there for 4.5 years. And one of the first privileges that was given to me was to meet a deacon in that church by the name Anita van Griethuizen. Now, Anita van Griethuizen was a piece of work. She was marvelous. She had been elected to the Board of Deacons about 5 years before I got there. But before that, she'd been sitting there in a pew on Sunday morning watching things to see what she approved of, to see what might be being done wrong. And she reached a conclusion. And when she became a deacon, she immediately asked to be placed on the committee to prepare communion. And when they let her do that, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Now what she did was, every communion Sunday, the first Sunday of every month, she would go back after the service of worship and she would take all of the grape juice that had not been used in that communion service and put it into a bottle and take it home. And she'd make grape jelly. And she took that grape jelly and she put it in to baby food jars. And she collected them all year long. And then on the first Sunday in Lent, she brought in all of the baby food jars of grape jelly that she had made during the year, and they had labels on them, and they were called communion jelly. And she presented them to the Board of Deacons, and with the recommendation that they take those jars around and give them to shut-ins, to take them to the hospital and give them to members of the congregation who were in the hospital. And if there were enough, when there was a new family that came to church, give them a little jar of communion jelly. That went on and on. And when she finally left after 6 years or so on the Board of Deacons, she continued her ministry of grape jelly. Because she heard the gospel and she knew that there was a value in producing fruit. Now, I'm here to tell you that there's a church down in Warsaw that I told this story. And a lady in that congregation heard it. And she began making grape jelly from the grape juice that was left over after communion. And she put it in baby food jars. And on the first Sunday in Lent, she brings in her collection of grape jelly. And they give it to shut-ins and the people in the hospital. Now, somewhere in that practice, beyond the business of making the grape jelly, do you understand that there's something about the love of God that abides in the work of making the jelly, of taking the fruit and being sure that it lasts? And I remember, how many remember Jackie Gleason on TV, right? Remember his one-liner, how sweet it is. Communion jelly. Especially if you're lying in bed in a hospital. Or if you're wondering, where are you going to go to church now that you've moved to the community? And Jesus says, if you're connected to me, you will produce fruit. In this case, jelly. But it's not always that kind of thing, you understand. I've been in Leroy, maybe 3 years. It was a Sunday, a summer afternoon. It was hot. I was sitting in my office trying to imagine what, if anything, would I have to say to the congregation on the Sunday coming up. And I had to have the bulletin ready for the next day. And all of a sudden, standing there in the doorway was Ralph. Ralph was a piece of work. He never came to church. His wife did. His mother did. But Ralph did not believe in organized religion. He was what he called a home Baptist. He was the across the street neighbor of Howard, and Howard, the preceding Sunday, had a heart attack just as I was starting his sermon. And I'd been wondering about that, because my preaching the Word of God so bad that people have heart attacks over it. But Ralph stood there with a glower on his face. What are you going to do about Howard? I don't know what you're talking about. Howard's daughter just graduated from high school. She's supposed to start college in the fall. What are you going to do about it? What do you want me to do about it? I'll tell you what I want you to do about it. I'm willing to give $1 for every dollar you people in the church are willing to give toward Karen's going to college. How much are we going to need? We're going to need $2,000. I said, okay. Why don't you go home and warm up your checkbook? I'll be around to see you. And off he went. Well, there was a lady in the congregation who was on the committee that brought me to Leroy, who was so terrific. And I knew if anybody knew how to get access to money from the Women's Association or what have you, she would know. I went over and I knocked on her door. She came to the door and I said, Isabel, I need your help. She said, well, come on in and tell me about it. I went in. I told her about Ralph, and she burst out laughing. She got up from the couch, went over to her desk, opened it up, and she sat down and she said, anytime you can get money from that man, you come to me first and I'll help you get it. And she wrote out a check for $1,000. And less than a half an hour after Ralph left my office, I was knocking on his front door. I had taken the check and I had folded it and held it so you could not see the name of the signature. But you could see the amount that the check was written for. Ralph came to the door and I said, did you warm up your checkbook? He said, you, and then expletive that I just as soon not mention in church. And he said, the only condition is no one must know where this money came from. And he reached in his wallet and he pulled out a check for $1,000 that he'd already written. He somehow knew that I'd be there. The fruit of your labors, it bubbles up. Sometimes in grape jelly. Sometimes in a couple checks. And I'm here to tell you that Karen went through 4 years of college. And nobody ever knew where that money came from. And by the end of that 4 years, Ralph had enough confidence in me that he would stop by my office at least twice a year and say, I've got a family I want to help. Here's a check for $1,500. Here's a check for $1,000. Here's a check for $750. Make sure they get the money, but they don't know where it came from. He never did come to worship in church. But are you going to tell me that he wasn't beloved of God? You're going to tell me that Christ did not abide in him? Nuts. I don't believe it. Because when Christ abides within us, life-affirming things happen in our lives. Not because we're so terrific, but because the Christ who dwells in us enables us to do good things. How about that? You don't have to believe that if you don't want to. But I do ask that you believe that I believe it. Because that's the bottom line for me, that you understand that. This is what Jesus is talking about. This is what Leonard Sweet's talking about. It's not about doctrine. It's about relationship. It's about how you can stretch out to another person, and through your stretching, their lives can become fuller and richer and more joyful, with an added ingredient of wonder. Holy smokes. I have a friend who says that the word grace really means, I'll be damned, someone just got away with something. Thank you, Ralph, you did. So there it is. When I went to Leroy, there was an old conjurer who was the custodian of the church. His name was Hobie Hedden. Great man. He had 1,000 stories, and not one of them ever diminished another human being, but only lifted them up. Hobie's wife, Verna, died one winter, and as spring was coming on, I would stop by every week to 10 days to see how he was doing, because they were so devoted to each other, so close. When you saw them together, you knew what the word abide means. They abided with one another, and they enriched every life they touched. So this one February, late February afternoon, I knocked on Hobie's door, and Hobie came to the door and looked at me, and then he shook his head and he said, I never thought I'd say it, or even think it, but I'm so glad that Verna isn't here now. I said, Hobie, what's wrong? What's going on? He said, well, you know, I've got all these maple trees around in this neighborhood, and I've always wanted to make maple syrup. And when it got warmer earlier this month, I went out and I tapped those trees. And I ended up with 40 gallons of maple sap, and decided that I was going to make maple syrup on my kitchen stove. Come look. You see, the problem that Hobie had not anticipated was that he had no ventilator over the kitchen stove. He had no way to get that moisture out. And when I walked into his pristine, all white kitchen, it looked as if, for all the world, he had invited all of his buddies over, and when they came to the door, he gave them each a chaw of tobacco, and they began chewing, and they went into the kitchen and stayed there and spit all over the place. There was tobacco brown on the walls, and on the floor, and on the ceiling. And he said, I am so pleased that Verna isn't here to see this, but I have to tell you, it's wonderful maple syrup. And I burst out laughing, and the two of us got out a couple of scrub buckets and mops, and we spent the afternoon scrubbing the walls, scrubbing the ceiling, scrubbing the floors, telling stories of Verna and Hobie, and remembering the wonderful things that they did. And God was in the telling of the stories. Now, I have a theory. I don't know if we'll ever get a chance to test it out. But I have a theory that each of us, somewhere in our lives, has a story of God's abiding love that became real to us through some relationship, some incident that bore fruit, that brought us closer together, that revealed the nature of the love of God in our lives. And my theory goes that we would have some week when we would decide that we'd share those. Instead of a sermon, we would have an open mic with each person here having the opportunity to come up and tell a story of God's abiding love that discloses itself in our relationships with others. The ways in which God peeks out. This is bear fruit. Laugh. Wonder. Enjoy. Breathe deep. Celebrate. Because this is the life that I gave you. I gave it to you to share with one another. That in sharing, all the gifts of God might become manifest and enjoyed. Thanks be to God.